You're listening to The Valley Current.
Welcome into The Valley Current. We're doing a special series, and I'm so glad to have with me Steve. Let me get your pronunciation right, Steve, because I always get it wrong.
My dad went with Rabin, but two-thirds of people called me Rabin, and I decided to go with the flow.
Right, and let me just do this first. I'm going to share a screen that shows your website because you have a great website and you have a great website name. Now I just have to find the screen that I want to share. This is your website, which I think is great. Good.
That screen you just minimized is my 24/7 chat service.
Okay, good. All right, that's useful because I think it's you're one of the most accessible CPAs that I know. And the fact that you could say most tax problems fixed, a lot of people won't make that kind of statement. They'll give you a lot of hemming and hawing about this is a big problem. You probably need to eventually trademark that if you can. It's obviously your byline as for your firm. Just the way Computer Law Group, when you look at what we do, we like to say we're lawyers for the internet economy, and we got a registered mark. But I'll leave that to one side because we want to get to the start of the actual substantive presentation. And I thought the way we should start just quickly is to make sure everyone has seen this. I'm going to play this for a few minutes or a few seconds because I think it's highly valuable in this context.
This is their new house. We have it totally under control. One person coming in from China. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear. When you have 15 people, and within a couple of days, it's going to be down to close to zero. We really think we've done a great job in keeping it down to a minimum. I like this stuff. I really get it. People are surprised that I understand it. No, I don't take responsibility at all. Priorities USA Action is responsible for the content of this ad.
So the reason I played that is because it really is kind of an important backgrounder to what we're talking about. I'll get rid of that channel. And in fact, there is a letter that's a demand letter. I should put it up on the screen just for completion. A New York lawyer named Alex W. Cannon, Cannon. He's actually with a big firm, Wilkie Farr and Gallagher, a big New York firm. He wrote a 6-page letter. I'll just summarize it. Essentially, he says, look, the context of that ad leaves out the fact that the president, meaning Mr. Trump, was targeting the tactics of the Democrats to try to use this virus for political gain. And obviously, all is fair in love, war, and politics. And you would think a lawyer would have a hard time. Of course, he attaches lots of back and forth about how the ad, that particular ad is subject to some question or some criticism. And he cites to the Washington Post's Pinocchio award, saying that the ad gets 4 Pinocchios, which means it's considered pretty misleading. Of course, Trump has gotten like 20,005 Pinocchios. So he's kind of affirming the Washington Post. The guy who wrote this, I would say, either hasn't taken a course in constitutional law or doesn't really care what First Amendment rights have to say in political debate. It's literally impossible to imagine that they would file a lawsuit or that lawsuit would get very far at all. In fact, it likely would be a Rule 11 violation. I'm sure lots of lawyers, including people like Professor Tribe at Harvard University, will undoubtedly comment on all this, but that ad is making its way. And contextually, what it really denotes is we're in the middle of a crisis, and it is causing a number of businesses, particularly local restaurants and service retail and retail generally, to denote that there's a real problem here. And in fact, we were supposed to put, that's why I went to our website, we were supposed to put some statement on our website, hey, we're still open for business, but it is virtual, because we do get people, just like you might, who are sort of wondering, well, are you actually open or are you closed? And that's why I'm putting all these screenshots up there, because the first thing is that, yes, both you and I and most law firms and most accounting firms, in fact, I don't know any that have actually closed down entirely, are open, but they're operating from a virtual practice. Now, you and I are a little more risk takers, so I'm literally in my office. That's where the radio booth is here. You're, I think, in your office in San Francisco. That's where your radio booth is now set up. So we should start with that preface. I don't know what you want to add to that introduction, but it does provide some context both about our two firms, the fact that they're still operating and operating with some degree of expansion of services, because people are calling about lots of things where they can't get through to their various other advisors, like even the trust and estates people, who either must be doing higher priorities or maybe they've just decided to shut down for a while.
Perhaps they are less technologically savvy than you and I. Being computer law group, of course, you know how to stay online.
Yeah, we've been doing this stuff I've been in practice for over 40 years, and I would say we have had a computer industry practice from day one, 35 years ago. And I, of course, at Fenwick & West, we literally introduced the concept of computer law representing notable companies at startup like Apple Computer and Electronic Arts and Oracle and a host of others. A list just too long to list on the radio, and those guys are doing well and they're good friends of the firm. I haven't checked in with them. I need to call the managing partner there and some of my friends who are not yet retired, most of them are, and find out what's happening, because that's a fairly substantially large firm. I want to say 500-600 lawyers in a number of different cities, and all of those cities, I think, pretty much have stay in place orders, so they've had to go completely virtual as well. But I haven't heard much about that. But Steve, we put together an agenda, and we thought it would be helpful to use the next 20 or so minutes to let people know things they can do, things they should be doing, things they should be watchful for helping them get through this current environment. So do you want to tick off the list and drive the list? Because a lot of the topics have to do with ways to deal with the squeeze on money, because I think we are going to see a number of different companies slow down the way in which they pay, and I'm sure receivables will grow, and people will say, well, do I need to make these payables? How should I prioritize? We covered in the last show how folks should prioritize their payroll because of the risks involved if they don't do so. But what else is on your list right now?
So the list starts with two real estate related items, the discussion of, landlord situation in terms of potential discrimination and perhaps ADA applicability to coronavirus victims.
Yeah, that's a big issue, because there certainly are landlords that are wondering, hey, if a tenant is out of work and is sort of working from home, but they're saying, look, I don't know if my company is going to lay me off. I've got to put aside money for food and other priorities. You could say that particularly if there is legislation, which I think there is right now pending in certain cities, that say, look, there's a bit of a rent moratorium, which is hard to believe that can actually be legal, that a government, particularly a municipal government, say in San Francisco, can say, don't worry about paying your rent. Now, the courts probably are not going to be enforcing any unlawful detainers. That's the technical term for kicking someone out for failure to pay rent. The first step is the landlord serves you with a 3-day notice to quit. It's doubtful that if you stay beyond the 3-day notice that you're actually going to see a court order you to be evicted. Even in the best of times, and particularly in San Francisco, most people tell me it takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months to evict a tenant. But tell me what your side of this is, maybe from more of the landlord's point of view, and what do they do if they're not getting paid rent? Because of course that in turn may mean the bank is not going to get paid on its mortgage obligation, right?
Yeah, having been a landlord and having landlord clients, it can be a very sad situation, especially in some of the local municipalities with special rent control and other rules. do you have practice in that area?
Yeah, we do, but I have to tell you that a lot of our landlord and real estate clients have such good corporate tenants that there's never really an issue. So our practice tends to be more commercial leasing. We've seen a few, and we've done a few pro bono type landlord tenant cases, but by and large, this has become a very specialized area with lots of technicalities and lots of local rules and local restrictions about a lot of things. So there actually are lawyers that just do landlord tenant and just do eviction cases for residential landlord tenants, both from the landlord side of the bar as well as from the tenant side of the bar. And fundamentally, it's become a volume type practice. So I have some experience because we've done pro bono work, including for pro bono tenants that have been unjustly evicted or sought to be evicted. I don't know if we'll take any more of those pro bono cases right now, but there are a few pro bono cases like this where someone who's sick is probably going to be able to say, look, you cannot push me out of my apartment just because I'm sick and just because I'm not paying. I mean, it is sort of like a form of socialism to say you don't pay and you can still stay. That seems a little odd. That said, the government, and certainly the San Francisco municipal government, I believe, has announced that yes, there does not need to be a rent payment. I don't know how fair that is to the landlords of the world who have to pay their bills, but certainly it seems as though government's going to come in with some sort of suspension program until some of this federal money starts to make its way to people that would then pay rent, right?
Maybe the landlord can push back on the lender, and the lender can't repossess in this climate.
Yeah, the lender's not going to be able to repossess for sure. And that probably makes them a little nervous about doing refinancings of properties because they've got to worry about, well, what if you get a big refinance and then you just don't pay? What happens then? So somewhere in this, it's like all the wheels are interconnected and there's been a gigantic spanner thrown into the gearbox and all the wheels are just grinding to a halt, and the lubrication that has to somehow fix the fact that the gears are all out of mesh is federal government with this $2 trillion bailout that I think they actually did sign this afternoon. I saw an announcement that it did get signed just a few minutes ago.
Oh, okay.
Like literally. So on the ADA side, let me just comment, that's the American with Disabilities Act, and it generally says that public accommodations cannot be restricted or eliminated for folks. In fact, they have to be enhanced for folks that have a disability. And I think the odds are high that someone who's actually sick with the virus is going to be viewed as having at least a temporary disability. Now you might say, well, don't they have to be quarantined? And why do I have to take them into my facility if they really should be in a quarantine? And the answer might be, look, if there's no place else for them to go and they want to rent a room in a hotel, maybe you rent the room to them in a hotel and you just ask them to stay in the room and they quarantine in the room. I think there are some people on the road or who have not been able to make flights who literally probably fit in that category. And if they're booted out or prevented from having access to hotels, they probably will have a claim under the ADA Act. Whether they bring it or not is another question, but it does provide for attorney's fees and lots of other remedies. So we may see an explosion of those cases shortly. Why don't we go to the second point on your agenda, Steve?
And then we get more into the employer type matters. And there, for example, if the landlord is an employer, well, the landlord can potentially pick up some personal expenses and deduct them. Also, as an employer, there's a question mark regarding workers' compensation.
Yeah, I think some people are saying if the result of this generates an actual illness that creates a form of disability and a longer term stay, there will be additional workers' comp claims. We don't practice in that area either. But as an employer, you need to be aware that people who claim a disability are typically able to seek and obtain workers' compensation regardless of the cause of that disability. In other words, if someone gets the typical workers' comp is someone slips and falls on the job and they seek workers' comp because they have a job place injury. That's typical. There's no tort claim against the employer. The workers' comp system comes in to provide compensation to the worker. And there are all sorts of rules of you can't fire the worker for bringing such a claim or for taking the time off. That's the same under the ADA. But then the question becomes, what is this virus? Is it really that kind of injury? It wasn't really generated from the employment environment. It applies to all of us. It's in the atmosphere at this point. That's why some people say, even going outside enhances your risk. And even going to the grocery store or the supermarket enhances your risk. And people are supposed to. In fact, as we were speaking, there was a Santa Clara County Amber Alert that came on my phone. Some of the sound probably went into the speaker of it blasting away, saying the stay-in-place orders are still in effect, are in effect this weekend, are in effect until further notice. We're serious about it. And I have seen some police cars stop drivers almost like they're asking questions of people about why are you on the road. Of course, I bike to and from everywhere these days just to get the exercise because my gym is closed and the swimming pool I go to is closed, so I'm not getting as much exercise. So I'm trying to make up for it. I don't know what
me too. It's definitely a pain point for me. On the workers' comp, now one point I want to make is that if you are a contractor or if you hire contractors, you are probably still covered by workers' comp. And you probably still can make a workers' comp claim because the standards for who is an employee under workers' comp are much more broad than the standards under other employment matters, even under AB 5.
Right. People don't realize that. That's a good point, Steve. People don't realize that the law is not 100% consistent across the board. The law tends to actually give certain areas greater policy impact. So workers' comp is one of them. And if a contractor gets injured on the job, like a painting contractor, there is a risk that the claim for workers' comp will be made and will be sustained, which doesn't really directly affect the employer other than perhaps to increase the future insurance premiums, because effectively there's a monthly insurance charge that every employer is obligated to pay that kind of goes into a fund, and the fund is essentially a broad-based insurance fund for dealing with the injury in lieu of the tort system dealing with the injury.
That's if the employer had employees and wasn't Schedule C with no employees. And that can put a Schedule C sole proprietor out of business, having a no employees situation, and then having an employee come down with coronavirus, file a workman's comp claim, and there's no coverage whatsoever, and that can close the business.
Right. People don't understand that. They think they're being cute by forming corporations and having them have zero employees, right? I mean, that's really your point here, isn't it?
It is. I'm saying that the $200 you spend to get the workman's comp coverage is very well spent.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize that, and a lot of people do stupid things. I think you and I both have seen it over and over again. We see it especially with startup companies that start with LegalZoom, where there's essentially a collection of pre-printed forms. It technically does start an entity, but the entity is completely...
Tune in next on the Valley Current.